All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time this afternoon and joining our Fellows Capstone presentation. If you do have a question for the presenters, if you could send that to their chat. Otherwise, wait until they are ready for questions. So they'll be presenting for 25 minutes, and then they'll be responding to questions for the last 10 minutes. And if you have something set up and ready for them, that works great. If there are technology issues, I've got a couple co-hosts that are helping me. So if I should leave for any reason, know that just stay where you're at and I'll just pop back on. Sometimes technology can be interesting, but we'll keep our fingers crossed that that's not the case. And we will work hard to really strictly follow that timeline that I had sent earlier. These presentations were really chosen around the topic of food insecurity due to the pandemic this last year, and we've all seen a lot about that. And so all three projects are really geared towards how the fellows, how the community can more effectively help with food insecurity. If they have a packet or any recommendations, I'll be sending those out tomorrow with my normal monthly communication. So you'll get the remaining information that they'll have available tomorrow. And this has been a 4-month project. So just really applaud all of these efforts to try and help our nonprofits in the community around these issues. They started in February. They've devoted a lot of time and just really have given it 100%. So I'm so grateful for everyone that's attending so you can see their work. I've covered the welcome. We've talked about some of the issues that we might have. Next, we've got the agenda. So I think we're ready to go ahead and start. The Central Iowa Shelter Group presentation will be first. Then we'll have a short 5-minute break. Then we'll go into the LSI Community Farm and Food Sovereignty Project Group, then another 10-minute break, and we'll finish it off with the Eat Greater Des Moines Community Fridge Project Group, and also that ties into the Sweet Tooth Farm Project as well, and they'll talk about that. If you're wondering who's on each group, there's an outline. It was sent with the earlier communication, but just as kind of a refresher, if you wanted to see who's on what. We will have people coming and going as their time allows this afternoon. So you'll see some new faces come and go occasionally as we get into those, but anxious to get started otherwise. So again, let's go ahead and get started. We welcome the first group, which is the Central Iowa Shelter Group, and would like to have Tyler go ahead and introduce or kick us off.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Ann. Hi, everyone. My name is Tyler Tebow. I work at Walmart, and for our group project, we actually weren't able to have everybody join us, all the group members join us for this meeting, so we actually recorded our presentation prior. So I'm going to pull that up now. Okay, you guys can see. Excellent. All right. Without further ado, let's kick us off.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Today, we're going to talk about the project we did with Central Iowa Shelter and Services. So to start off, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on the project itself and also who CISS is. So I think the best way to kind of give you an idea of what Central Iowa Shelter and Services does is to share their mission statement with you. And that is, since 1992, Central Iowa Shelter and Services mission is to provide low barrier shelter, meals, and support services at no cost to adults experiencing homelessness and to facilitate their move towards self-sufficiency. So our project was to help form a recommendation of how a food truck could help them achieve their mission. And so one of the goals that we had for the food truck was to promote self-sufficiency, which tied right back into their mission statement. And the way we were going to do that is to directly create job opportunities. both in growing the food and also in the preparation and the sales of the food itself in the food truck. We also wanted to support the agri-hood in the greenhouse with the revenue generated by the food truck. And we also wanted to utilize the food truck to raise awareness and also provide meals to those in need out in the field.
When thinking about the goals of the food truck, a key idea we focused on is value-added agriculture. A quick, simple definition of value-added agriculture is the idea of adding value to agricultural commodities. So we want to take the freshly grown produce from CISS and increase the appeal to consumers so they are willing to pay more for the product. In the case of the food truck, there are many examples. The main ones are how you can take the tilapia and fresh produce to make fish tacos and a variety of salsas and coleslaws and other foods. People will obviously pay more for this food than buying them wholesale. But in addition to that, it also benefits the community as a whole by serving people experiencing food insecurity, as meals will be given out for free to those unable to pay. Another vital addition is the jobs it will create for the people working within the truck. These jobs will be given to those who utilize or have utilized CISS in the past. This will help train them for a future job in the food industry. Also, the fact that these will be locally grown is an example, since it has become more of a trend in the past few years as people realize the importance of supporting local. So all of these are great side effects that can be produced.
So I also want to talk about some of the regulations that we looked into surrounding owning and operating a food truck. So the first thing is that food trucks are subject to licensing and inspection by the Iowa Department of Inspection and Appeals. And the relevant regulations can be found under a Class 4 mobile unit. And there's also a $250 annual licensing fee. So we also looked into what was involved with utilizing the CISS and other kitchens, and if we wanted to prepare food before going onto the food truck itself to save us some time and the space on the food truck. And we found that as long as the kitchen is licensed and inspected beforehand, then everything would be fine. So in the case of CISS, there's no issue because it already is licensed. Something else that we looked into is that depending on what kind of food truck you get, if there is a deep fryer, there are additional fire hazard regulations that should be taken into account. And then lastly, there are some exceptions for nonprofits in regards to being licensed as a food truck, but there are restrictions that come with that as well. And mainly that means that you can only sell food one day a week. And we didn't think that aligned with the goals of CISS with their food truck.
We met with the brand for the truck that included a name and design, and we understood that it's important for the truck to be recognizable as connected to CISS. So we worked with the CISS logo and colors. As you can see, the logo is prominent on the truck, but we also made it a bit fun by adding doodles of the vegetables and fruits grown in the greenhouse and agri-hood. We've even included a little tilapia. The name Pesca Fresca means fresh fish or fresh catch. We think going with an updated brand like this or something similar could be a good way to appeal to both a typical consumer passing by and also those who may be experiencing homelessness or food insecurity and can connect to CISS as a valuable resource.
The goal of the menu was to keep it as simple as possible, as we knew the ingredients were going to be changing each week with the different growth cycles and donations that came into the shelter. So similar to the way that the shelter kitchen operates, the chefs have to have that same flexibility in mind each week because they don't know what ingredients they're going to be working with each week. And so that's why the food truck menu also had to have that same creativity aspect to it. And so we found the best way to utilize the produce from the agri-hood, which was mainly the tilapia, lettuce, fruits, and vegetables, was to create a build-your-own style menu that included the fish tacos, rice, salsas, coleslaws, and a variety of different toppings. If you go to the next slide, you'll see we put together an example of what the menu might look like. So similar to the way Subway, Chipotle, or any other build-your-own style restaurant operates, we divided the menu up into sections. So for step one, you would pick your base. This could be a tortilla or a bowl with rice, lettuce, or lentil beans, for example. And then step two, you would pick your protein. which basically just means what style of fish you want and what seasoning. Step 3, you'd add your toppings, and then step 4, you'd add salsas or sauces. To view the menu, we obviously would want it to be displayed on the truck physically. That would be with like a whiteboard, a chalkboard, or maybe even a poster. But we also like the idea of doing an online version as well, where you could scan a QR code and that could take you to the CISS website, or maybe even a specific Facebook page for the truck where they could post ahead of time where the truck was going to be that day and then what's available on the menu. Moving on to specials. These could be daily, weekly, or monthly, but the main goal behind these is to help utilize any excess ingredients that the shelter has. So for example, if there was an excess amount of sweet corn one week, you could use that to create an Iowa taco with corn as a specialty option. Specialty tacos could even be created for planned events or just be a combination of based on what's available that day. Specials give that convenience factor for people who either are in a hurry or don't have any specific preferences that day. And then finally, we decided to put our ideas and menus concept to the test by partnering with chefs at CISS to create a taste test day. On the next slide, you'll see pictures of what we created that day for the menu. We had 5 different base options, which included a corn and flour tortilla, lentil beans, rice, and then lettuce. We had 5 different fish taco recipes. We had a Spanish rice with corn, cilantro lime rice, 2 sauces, a tartar sauce base and 1 Dijon based. We had 3 salsas, peach, apple, and a pico de gallo, and then 3 coleslaws, a regular slaw, jalapeno slaw, and then a kale slaw. These are all things that could be grown in the agri-hood, except obviously for a few things like tortillas, rice, and spices, for example. The menu that we created was simple, yet there were multiple combinations you could create. And I think I can speak for everyone that everything tasted great and overall went really well.
So in terms of donations, we wanted to lean into the spirit and purpose of CISS by making free meals available for anyone who would need it. The meals would be donated by our customers, a group effort for helping those who couldn't necessarily afford. We wanted to keep track of the total numbers of free meals donated by advertising. Our customers have paid forward X number of meals for those in need. We felt this would make the customers feel good about donating and make them feel part of and contributing to something good. So we thought of 2 methods for creating some sort of donation system. These would not be mutually exclusive. So the first, we thought a customer could pay forward a full meal, and we would put a ticket on the wall, which could be redeemed for a full meal with no additional costs. The second would be rounding up to the nearest dollar. So we would simply ask the paying customer if they would like to round up to the next nearest dollar. Once the aggregated donated total amount reached a certain dollar amount, we would place a ticket on the wall, which could again be redeemed for a meal. We also thought about making a sign saying something like X number of dollars until the next donated meal. But regardless of what system we go with, we'll always have a ticket on the wall. So if there's anyone ever in need that walks by, they wouldn't be discouraged by no tickets on the wall.
We had the idea of having an informative pamphlet offered at the truck. We definitely want printed copies that can be picked up and kept, but we thought another good option would be to do a QR code as well for people to scan and get the same information. The pamphlet would include the menu, and hopefully after people look at the menu, they continue to scroll and see, first and foremost, information on CISS, so what CISS does, how they benefit the community, how the food truck is involved, maybe even saying something like, by purchasing this meal, you help. It could also give more information about where the food came from, so the greenhouse, and maybe an illustrated map of the upcoming agri-hood. Also, a list of ways for people to help, volunteer, or donate. We also want this to be a resource for those experiencing homelessness or food insecurity by having info on local food pantries and things like that.
So we also estimated some of the cost for startup and the cost of business for the food truck. The initial purchase price of the food truck was estimated based on some of the food trucks that CISS was looking into, estimated at $26,000. The food truck annual license, as previously mentioned in another slide, would be $250 annually, and a common annual vehicle insurance for a food truck costs $1,260. With our food day findings from the store, it costs about $163 to feed roughly 15 people. So to get started, just for a small number of people, with the cost of the food truck, the annual licensing fee, and the insurance, you'd be looking at $26,412.90. At CISS's current food costs, the same amount of food for those 15 people is estimated at roughly $132.81. Once the AgriHood is running to full capacity, it's assumed that their cost would be roughly half that of the grocery store. For example, the tilapia that we used for the food day was quite pricey, where the AgriHood is estimating roughly 69 cents per tilapia, which will feed multiple people for multiple tacos. And if you go to the next slide, we get a little bit into the cost for each taco combo. So we compared pricing of 3 taco restaurants in the Des Moines area, along with pricing for 2 taco trucks outside of the Des Moines area, as there are no taco trucks in the area, which is another benefit for CISS for this project. With those comparisons, we priced 2 tacos at $6, or a combo meal with 2 tacos, a side, and a drink at $10. So just to run some numbers, if we assume that each 2-count taco $6 and each combo meal is $10, then if 100 combo meals are sold weekly, and there's just around $50 to $100 donated each week, within 1 year, the store cost, CISS would be negative $39,348.75 by the end of 1 year. At their current costs for food, they'd be negative $28,258.79. But at the, what I like to call the AgriHood imagined cost, with the half the price of the grocery store, they would be at negative $13,935.46 within the first year. Those costs are assuming that the food truck is running 3 days a week for 8 hours each day, and that there are 2 employees working during those timeframes at $9 an hour, which would be an annual salary of $22,464.
So if we consider each taco combo at $10 and consider the use of the CISS AgriHood, there's an opportunity for profit within 3 fiscal years. So CISS with that AgriHood imagined cost would be at negative $1,870.92 by the end of fiscal year 2022. But by the end of fiscal year 2023, we'd be seeing a profit. And if on the next slide, you'll see that the initial investment creates a huge opportunity for an additional revenue stream for CISS within that 3 fiscal year timeframe, in addition to all the other benefits that we've talked about for the community and for CISS's employee benefits as well.
Okay, so one of the major considerations of a food truck and purchasing a food truck is the location, where to put the food truck. So there's 2 categories of location, and those are free places and then paid places to operate the truck. So the first list we have here is free places, and those include public parks like Waterworks Park or any public park throughout the city. Obviously, on CISS property, it would be free to operate there. So the big conversation we were having throughout our time during the project was the new soccer stadium coming up in the next couple of years. It would be a huge opportunity for CISS to operate the food truck on their property as it's right across the street. It would be a nice addition to that area during the soccer games, during the events there. Other free places include churches, the Capitol complex with the correct permission from the authorities there. Parking lots of local breweries. Another big conversation we had with Melissa was her relationships with different owners of restaurants and bars throughout the city, and parking lots of local breweries is definitely a huge one. That would be really good operating space for us. And then libraries, another public place might be a nice way to get people out of the library, away from their books, and just grab a nice bite to eat afterwards. So the one caveat with free places is that although they're free, they might still require special permission from like owners or local authorities there, so for permission to park there. And then the next category of locations is paid places to park. So these include like special events or the parking meters around like Papa John's Sculpture Park or Gateway Market during the work lunch hour. It would be a really nice opportunity for employees of all the businesses to step out of the office during their lunch hour and just grab a quick fish taco. The farmers market would be a huge one over there on Saturday mornings. Just a nice way to spread the word of CISS and what they do, the purpose, and then also feed the public with some fish tacos. And of course, ticketed events. So a couple ideas were the state fair. That's a huge one. I mean, people come from all over Iowa, so that would be perfect for a nice marketing effort. And again, just feeding people with really good fish tacos. Wells Fargo Arena, definitely something that would need to be arranged with the owners there or the management of the arena. Juneteenth and Pride, that's a really good opportunity. Same with Latino Heritage, 8035, and any special events that food trucks can attend. It would be a really good opportunity for the CISS food truck to be there. And there was a really big conversation with food trucks moving out to the suburbs. There is a greater push for employees out in like the West Des Moines area, Waukee, all the other suburbs. They don't always have like lunchroom in their place of work. So it would be really a good idea to park in a parking lot, again with that special permission, and potentially a fee to park out there and feed employees over in the business parks or the areas over there in the suburbs. So in terms of operating zones, there are 3 in Des Moines proper, and then these are average costs for permitting, and these are city permits. So the average cost of operating in the city is $1,750, and then we have a breakdown of operating fee schedules. The most common one for food trucks in the area is an annual schedule. So for West Des Moines, it would be between $280 and $350. And then for Des Moines, it's $570 flat rate. And then for each meter hood in the city, it is $1,180 per meter hood. And so for the food truck, it would be 2 times that because we would have a truck and a trailer. Or for if it was just a truck, then it would be 1 meter hood. So in terms of location legal considerations, food trucks cannot infringe upon the public right-of-way. So this means that they can't park on parking lots, they can't block entrances of other buildings, and then similarly, they can't operate within 100 feet of another business. So they definitely can't block another business's right-of-way for the public. And there are additional fees for parking on private property. So the permitting costs here are $350 and $550 for West Des Moines and Des Moines, respectively. The food truck will also have to adhere to business hours. So if the food truck is parked on a business lot that closes at 8 p.m., they can't operate past that. The food truck can't. And fees are sometimes waived for nonprofits, depending on the location. And there's a limit of 3 consecutive operating days there.
During the exploration of this project, we did have the ability to speak to some current food truck business owners around the area, specifically in the immediate downtown Des Moines area. One of the things they all agreed on is making sure that we know how much we can fit in our truck at a time. So part of that cost that we discussed earlier kind of accounts for having a certain number of hands on deck. But if we are not able to hold food within the truck for a certain amount of time, we may have to have deliveries from the kitchen. And we should account for and look for what that might look like going forward. Another area that we really want to consider is, again, sustainable solutions. We think that moving the agri-hood itself and finding sustainable solutions within that could lead towards arriving at that agri-hood imagined cost at a faster rate. And then again, next steps, we're looking for immediate, in the short term, looking towards purchasing and licensing that food truck and recognizing what kind of garden yield we'll receive in the next couple of fiscal years. As Austin touched on earlier, we were looking to move towards a seasonal menu to really take hold of exactly what the agri-hood is going to produce and aligning with that to meet that imagined cost. And then again, what Tyler just went over would be surveying potential food truck locations. What do those food truck locations look like to CISS and what might be better solutions over others?
Okay. So I speak on behalf of the rest of the group. This has been an amazing opportunity to work with a nonprofit locally in the Des Moines area. It's been an amazing journey to build out this strategy, and we're really looking forward to seeing the food truck potentially come to life in the next couple of years. So thank you to Melissa and the rest of the Central Iowa Shelter and Services team. It's been awesome. And right now for the audience, the virtual audience, we'll open up the floor for questions, and we'll get answers to those as we can. Thank you. All right. Looks like there's a couple questions. Well, not questions. So time to talk about the timeline and revenue hopes as well. Jessica, are you on? I think you're on.
Yeah, I'm on.
Do you want to go over the revenue schedule?
Yeah, so for the free meals, we were estimating, give me just a second here, estimating that we would get roughly $50 to $100 each week for donations, which would be 5 combo meals to 10 combo meals per week. And then we're not necessarily assuming that all of those meals would be utilized, so the rest would just go back into the food truck for additional profit.
Yeah, and then in terms of timeline for the food truck and everything to come to fruition, it really depends on when the food truck is able to be purchased. We're still going through some options. We've had some good ideas of which food trucks we wanted, but it really depends on when we can get that purchased and then the rest of the agri-hood planted. So the agri-hood is in development, but then once all those plants are in the ground, it will take some time to get some yield from the fruit trees and everything. It'll take some time to get yield from those. So it'll be a little bit still.
One thing that I wanted to add quickly was that the CISS really wants to make sure we also include a no turn away policy. they never want to see someone go hungry. So part of that uncalculated expense is also in how much yield will go towards feeding the homeless like they do now at their facility, but just through the food truck.
Okay, got some other questions in the chat here. Do you have an estimate of how many free meals will be provided each year based on your analysis?
Sorry, that was kind of the question I was trying to answer
Okay.
in the chat when I said 5 to 10 meals per week. I don't know what that would actually look like as far as how many people would utilize the truck, but that's what we're estimating for how much would get donated.
Gotcha. And then Ryan, this one might be for you. How do you plan to track donations rounded to the nearest dollar that don't quite add up to a full meal?
Yep. So I guess the most manual solution would just be tracking it off the side on maybe a spreadsheet or something. But we did want to kind of advertise how much was left until the next free meal. So whichever way we track it, just making that available. Because like if someone were to go up, a paying customer go up and see that there's $1.20 left till the next meal, they might be more willing to donate $1.20 rather than rounding up to their next nearest dollar. So just having that available for customers.
Yeah. The next question, there's a lot of food trucks in Des Moines already. How do we, or have we considered that there would be a competitive, or that our food truck would be competitive with existing food trucks? So I think early on in the research, there was a discovery that there aren't any fish taco food trucks. So that would be unique in itself. Like, yes, there are taco trucks in the area, but I think fish tacos are pretty unique. And in addition, so the tilapia that will be grown at the CISS property in their fish tanks there will be like locally grown, which is probably going to definitely be a big differentiator for other, like if somebody imports fish from not a Des Moines area, it'll take longer and it'll probably taste better. So that would be a big differentiation point for our fish taco truck.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think another point which maybe we didn't make clear in our presentation is that one of the goals was that CISS has a greenhouse going in, and one of the main things that's part of the greenhouse is that they're going to have a large production of both lettuce and tilapia. And that part of the project was to utilize those things in the food truck. And so we kind of came up with, well, what do we do with lettuce and tilapia? Fish tacos is kind of how we landed on that. And so there might be some other things we could do, but to us, it made sense to kind of go with fish tacos. So yeah, I think that might help answer that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And group, with the expenses for CISS and putting the greenhouse together and raising the tilapia, those expenses were not included in this project. Is that correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Another question, whether maintenance and fuel for the food truck were considered. Yes, they were, but that also depends on what type of food truck is purchased. So if it's like a trailer, then we won't have as many costs because we won't have to pay for gas, or likely there will be only 2 tires on the trailer instead of 4. So it would be a difference in cost there. So it was considered, but it wasn't a part of the revenue analysis.
I did actually put a very small amount of gas cost into the revenue analysis, just kind of to start it out. However, I didn't add any additional gas because it's very heavily dependent as well on where they choose to go. I mean, if they choose to keep it on CISS property, then gas expenses are lower. So with that being very optional, I left that kind of out of the equation.
Okay. Robin says you can consider fish salad options for those who may have a gluten intolerance. Yep, that's true. So that was definitely our driver for adding like a lentil base. Natalie, do you want to speak more to like the different base options that we included?
Yeah, so we actually have a lettuce base option, or we have that in mind for the people that want to have more like a salad type bowl as opposed to tortillas. And I'll also quickly answer, or Melissa said to share for the plan for families with children, which we forgot to touch on, because during the taste test day, she brought up the fact that kids may be a little wary about having a fish taco. So we could also have like a kids menu that has like a quesadilla, like a very simple quesadilla. We'll already have the ingredients for it. And that's something that's like a little more kid friendly.
Yeah. And then Josh says, is there a maximum range that was determined for the truck? So we did consider different locations for it. Obviously, we want to keep it in the Des Moines metro area just because it's a local organization. We considered the idea of driving up to Ames for like the football games there, but the main area that we'd like to stay is the Des Moines metro, the suburbs and places around close to Des Moines.
Do you mind if I add to that, Tyler?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One thing we're also hoping is the soccer field plans kind of come to fruition. CISS is in a prime location near that proposed soccer stadium. So parking the food truck somewhere that's close to home base per se, but also close to that stadium could provide a nice revenue stream for those coming and going to the game.
And then Melissa just added, based on the group's research, they added a parking spot in the agri-hood for the food truck. So that's awesome. Definitely, of course, we would want to park it on CISS property. So that's great that that's already happening. Abby says, is this something that you would envision being available for rent for events? This is definitely an idea worth exploring more, but I don't think we explored it in our research. But that is definitely an idea.
Very good. Any other questions? We're at 1:40. Phenomenal job, group, CISS group. I love the name that you've come up with, the Pesca Fresca. That's very unique. Your logo is phenomenal. You created the logo on your own as well. Is that correct?
Actually, one of my close friends is a graphic designer, and so she was nice enough. She actually suggested the name as well, and she said it's been her dream to do graphics for like a food truck. So she had a really fun time putting it together.
No, that's very fun. It's really catchy, and I think that people would find it to be just really attractive, and they would remember that name and be able to tie it in with the work that CISS is doing. So that's phenomenal. Well, great job. I think we all will add to my thumbs up here that was just absolutely phenomenal. We'll look forward to seeing any paper handouts that I can send tomorrow to managers as well. And we will continue on, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Josh, to kick off the Global Greens LSI project.
Howdy, everyone. I'm actually going to go ahead and transition this straight over to Andrew today. So here you go, Andrew. Go ahead and take us off.
All right. So it's going to be hard to follow that last one. It was a very nice presentation. But what we worked on here was the Global Greens Initiative, which is a partnership of the Lutheran Services of Iowa. So what that project kind of entailed was, well, just a little introduction to it. So what they're doing is they're currently helping immigrant and refugee farmers connect with land here in the United States by providing land in the form of community gardens. They even have an 8.5-acre incubator farm. And this program seeks to provide training on how and when to grow crops in Iowa and how to maintain plots of land here in the United States, specifically Iowa. Currently, the program has community gardens that are donated by volunteer and private landowners. Oh, we should be on the next slide, Josh, sorry. And this particular approach kind of has an inherent flaw in that the gardens that are provided are not permanent, and at some point in the future they may become unavailable, leaving the farmers without a place to go and maintain farming for a living. So from the community gardens, the farmers potentially have the ability to grow on the 8.5-acre incubator farm that is located by the Valley West Community Center. Space is quite limited there, and there's currently a pretty long wait list for farmers to get into that farmstead to start with. Next slide. So a little bit about that farm. The incubator farm does allow farmers access to quite a bit larger plots of land to grow on and potentially make more money through various means. It was news to me, but they have a farmer's market out there and sell various different types of produce. I'm really fascinated and excited for the broccolini in particular. But as space is limited for the farmers, it is difficult to make individual livings off of the land without venturing out into private land ownership themselves, which can be a little costly. So as various farmers don't have immediate access to large sums of capital, the fellowship group here in Global Greens have partnered up to sort of think out solutions with the goal of farmers being able to have actual ownership of the land and to be able to make a living off the land permanently without the fear of losing that land, through means of eviction. Some solutions have largely to do with allowing farmers to sort of group up and raise capital to purchase land as an entity, sort of like a co-op within a business structure that allows for individual land ownership and with means to be able to make a living off the land in a fair way. We can go on to the next slide here. So the scope of the project was kind of something that we had to initially look at here. So the justification and the objective, so we had to be able to justify a reason for doing this and have a stated reason for doing it. So the goal of the Global Greens project is, just to be able to connect these people that are refugees and immigrants coming here to Iowa and help them build a sustainable life through farming and urban agricultural practices. Some of the scope here, the project scope evolved quite a bit over our discussions over the past few weeks, and we kind of went through various ideas, really. So a lot of the hurdles were kind of the pros and cons of each cooperative model. We explored some things like pass-through partnerships, cooperatives, limited liability corporations, leasing models, maybe even some sort of informal arrangement that's, obviously less formal as it entails, right? So the ultimate idea was to come up with a thing that would work out legally for these farmers to be able to group up and buy land, really, is kind of the ultimate goal. We prepared questionnaires that were sent out, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about that later, but to kind of get an idea of what all these farmers want out of all this, because at the end of the day, they are the people that are going to be taking care of everything in the end. If we can move on here. So with that, we had to identify some basic criteria and understand some constraints that we had to work with in the beginning anyway. And Abby will be going over this in a little bit more detail next, but just to kind of touch on it, there's a lot of constraints that were identified through our questionnaire and through our discussions with Zach and Juan. The limited experience of farmers, running, owning, operating a whole farm on their own was one hurdle. Obviously, the prices of the land is quite a large hurdle, especially in the greater Des Moines area. Prices just go up constantly. So, another thing was trying to even find that land that is available for farming. That's a pretty big hurdle here in the Des Moines area as expansion is rampant throughout here. So, And lastly, there's some basic common things that need to be addressed, such as the sharing of machinery, tools, bathrooms, kitchens, cleaning areas, basic common areas that you would expect. Because the whole idea was to kind of have them all put together and working on a farm in a sort of cooperative way without it being a cooperative. So, there's some hurdles there as well. So, and, touching on some of the risks and challenges, there's a need for legal counsel for sure, especially here in Iowa, because there are models similar to this that have worked in other states. But, frankly, here in Iowa, it's just a little bit different. Every state's a little different in how they handle the law. So, identifying those legal hurdles and finding a way to kind of snake around it is kind of a challenge, right? Working on the creation of bylaws or legal documents to kind of make sure everything's tidy within, like, for example, an LLC, making sure that all the farmers are held accountable to their own plots without hurting their fellow farmers. Other challenges included something like, the lack of trust amongst the farmers. I mean, at the end of the day, they're not all coming in here together. They don't know each other, super well. So, there's some trust issues there. And, there's also the idea of needing to understand and, maybe have these workshops and teach these farmers how to do things here in Iowa. Because, there's a lot of things when farming that, some of us might take for granted, understanding that certain crops can't be planted in the same area year after year. There has to be rotations of crops so that way things can grow efficiently. Iowa's not a tropical area, so certain things won't grow well here. So there's things that you have to go about doing that the right way. So that's kind of the beginning, the introduction to what we've been doing. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off here to Abby to discuss the approach that we took in identifying these things.
Thank you, Andrew. So this project, it was a very dynamic project, and it allowed us to be very creative. We didn't really have much constraints, and we're really given the opportunity to mold this project to best fit the people that was meant for. Having said that, the few things that we did have to consider first was the needs and wants of the farmers. So in first step in figuring out what our approach was going to be was to understand the needs and wants of the farmers, such as what are their main concerns, what are their views on collaborative farms versus independent farm, what does LSI's involvement look like in future, and if there are disputes between the farmers in future, how it will be handled, and what kind of land do they prefer. Having said that, the second thing that we had to consider was the land availability. What is the land that is available for the farmers to purchase, and the price? One of the things that the farmers mentioned was the land needed to be at the drivable distance from Des Moines Metro. So therefore, can we find a farm that is at a drivable distance from Des Moines Metro and with the right purchase tag and is the right size for the farmers? And will LSI be able to duplicate this approach to the farmers that they assist in future? And another big thing was, of course, the legality behind it. So there is quite a bit of legal issue that is attached behind, of course, the owning the land, but also parceling the land. So in Polk County, they discourage parceling the land into small acreages because it's really popular for affluent families to build home in those areas, which also means that it reduced quite a bit of farmland that was available between the driving distance of metro area. Also, as we were trying to figure out if it would be beneficial for LLC or co-op, we also needed to figure out, which model would actually be better effective and beneficial for the farmers. And as Andrew mentioned, one of the main reasons for farmers to own the land, other than to grow and maintain profitable business, was actually be able to build equity that they'll be able to utilize in future. So how does land equity look like in long term? So this was one of the toughest question that we encountered. And lastly, the big thing was, of course, the finance. So the lands are priced anywhere from $800,000 to $1 million. So some sort of financial assistance from external party would be required. In order to get a loan from a traditional bank, farmers need to show steady income, the income projection that would show farmers are capable of paying back the loan. And they also would need to put down payment of 20%. And for some farmers, this isn't very affordable. So we also needed to look at any programs or grant opportunities that are available for immigrant farmers and farmers that are starting up. Like Anne mentioned, we have 4 months of time constraints. So we decided the best way to really help was to maybe look at the legality of it and, and understand how we can establish an LLC or like a co-op so farmers can get started with this. Next slide, please. So in order to answer our question, we started to look at different case studies and also reached out to various organizations that could assist us. So one of the first one is HAFA, that's the Hmong American Farmer Association, which was founded in 2011 by Hmong farming refugees from Laos and Thailand that resettled to Minnesota after the Vietnam War. They're a big, was a great case study for us and a big success story of collective farming, as they have made up more than 50% of all farmers in Minnesota Metropolitan Farmers Market and are also generating over 250 million in annual sales. And today they manage about 155 acres of farm in North Dakota and Dakota County in Minnesota. And the members can lease land and hone their business and agriculture practices and also sell their produce in the Hafa Food Hub. So looking at their model was a big affirmation to us that we were moving towards the right direction. And that using collective farming model was something that the farmers at Global Greens could replicate. Another organization that we reached out to was the Drake Entrepreneurial and Transaction Law Clinic. So the clinic provides legal assistance to business, startups, entrepreneurs, and community nonprofit organizations in the community to help them establish a successful for-profit or nonprofit enterprises. So the clinic especially targets entrepreneurs that are located in underserved Des Moines neighborhood who are not able to afford legal counsel. So, and they will also actually help create the bylaws or any documentations that these enterprises need. So we were actually were able to meet with Nick Robbie, who's the faculty director, and his associate, and they really helped us provide a valuable insight into Iowa laws and how we could really get started with this project. And another organization is Iowa Institute for Cooperatives. They're based out of Ames and they promote co-op business model and provides educational and training support to new co-ops. And during our conversation with Dave Holm, who is actually the executive director for Iowa Institute of Cooperatives, we found out that for our specific situation, co-op was not really plausible because of the governing rules of Iowa. So, but with minor tweaking, we could just do this into an LLC. So that kind of gave us a direction. Then we reached out to ISU Center for Agriculture and Taxation. They basically provide assistance regarding agricultural rules and taxation for agricultural businesses in Iowa. So LSI will actually be working with Kristen going forward to any matters that would be related to taxations and like agricultural rules as a farmer is establishing the LLC. So I am going to hand over the presentation to Kuku, who is going to discuss about the solutions and how we're moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Abby. Thank you, Andrew, for getting us here. So as far as the solutions and outcome, I feel like one of the major things that we had to do as a group is wrap our hands around the project. I think as most of us know with projects, they're not nice, tidy boxes that are presented and like, oh, follow these steps. So as a group, we had to understand what the goal was and figure out how to break it up into steps that will help us get there, especially with time constraints. And that's what we're always navigating when we're working on projects, right? You have the outcome, but you have limited resource. The most limited resource for us was time. So based on the time that we had as a group fellowship program, how could we ensure that we were maximizing our impact to LSI? So we broke it down into a handful of steps. First step, establishing the cooperative or LLC. As far as the cooperative is concerned, we're using this term that Nick Roby over the Drake Legal Clinic came up with, condo op, which is kind of a hybrid model between a cooperative and a condo, because that's essentially what we're trying to do. There's no strict legal precedent for something like that, but as far as condos are concerned, it's essentially a single unit that is owned by an individual, which is part of a larger property, right? So how do you determine who's taking care of common areas? How do you determine rules that impact the individual apartments within the condo unit? That's the first slide. So figuring out the kind of structure and entity to use. Second slide, so steps 2, is figuring out what rules everyone within the entity has to abide by. Again, using the condo example, you live in a condo is 50 units, right? There are certain rules that every owner has to abide by. Despite owning the property yourself, you still have to follow the broader rules of the entire property. So defining what those rules are. One of the things Andrew mentioned was, as far as machinery is concerned, like determining how do they pay for machinery? How is the use of machinery shared amongst the farmers? Those are things that will be established within the operating agreement. Other questions like profit sharing. So after they've been able to put some plants in the ground, how do they share the profits from their work? Is it going to be a straight split across the number of farmers? Is it going to be based on the size of farm? So some really, really complicated questions. And to answer these questions, we really didn't want it to be coming from outside in. And that's why the survey was pushed out to the farmers. We wanted to really, really hear how the farmers want to make decisions. And we're still going through that, collecting that information and using that information to define this agreement, because it's an agreement that they're going to have to abide by if they decide to purchase into this entity together. So we figuring out the kind of operation is going to be, figuring out the bylaws of the operating agreement, and then after figuring out those 2 steps, finding financing. As Abby mentioned, there's potential to have external investors. And even that size of intent or investors is going to be governed by the operating agreement. You're an investor. What does that entitle you to? Does that entitle you to the land, or does that entitle you to profits down the road? If it's an independent donation, how do independent donations coming in future, how are they applied? How are they applied across the different lots, different plots? How do they impact the individual farmers? Where it's just, again, a very, very interesting model that we're trying, where there's individual ownership within a collective. And of course, this is a project that we want to be sustainable. We want to be able to come back in a couple of years and new farmers coming in, new immigrant farmers coming in, have the opportunity to own land in Iowa. So a scalable project. So that's one thing that we're trying to put together and figure out, okay, this is the first example, what mistakes were made, and how can we create a more sustainable and scalable operation. Josh, we can move on to the next slide, please. So as far as what we'll be doing in future, continue working with the Drake Legal Clinic and the Iowa Agricultural Law and Taxation Center. and bringing these people together, bringing these subject matter experts together to figure out a workable, interesting solution. Because as Abby mentioned, we'd started talking about the co-op, then we brought in the man from Iowa cooperatives, and he let us know that some things that we're trying that we couldn't necessarily do. Then we brought in Christine from Iowa State, and Christine had a couple of ideas on structures that could more lead to the LLC model within like a condo up kind of thing. So we'll be pushing on that to establish the actual model that we'll be using. We'll be presenting the findings to the farmers. And as I mentioned, we've tried to listen to the farmers as much as possible. There's a couple of surveys that went out. One on the LSI team has been incredible in gathering and collecting that data and doing analysis on that data and condensing the information that was presented so that we can provide meaningful input as far as the operating agreement is concerned. And then we move towards financing. So aggressively reaching out to financial institutions, figuring out what is necessary and needed. In the very beginning of the process, Abby reached out to a couple of people over at Bankers Trust just to get an understanding of what kind of documents will be necessary to provide lending to these kinds of farmers and what kind of collateral was needed. So there's an idea of that already. Josh, we can move on to the last slide. So with this project, we're able to really bring in some of the things that we've learned through the fellowship so far. Some of the tarot trainings that we went through, where, of course, in the very beginning, like this huge project, a lot of breadth, large scope. We knew that there's, I don't say an issue, but there's something that needs to be solved. There's a problem that needs to be solved. And coming together and figuring out, okay, as potential leaders, as people who want to think of ourselves as innovative, how do we wrap our hands around this project to create an achievable solution? A big thing was just most of the meetings were on Zoom. So figuring out how to manage our personalities, manage our essentially self-awareness. We've all taken the personality test, so I think that was incredibly helpful in how we navigated the conversations within the group, because they weren't always easy conversations. Again, we started with a lot of breadth. We kept on figuring out how to narrow it into a manageable project. And I think a big part also is bringing in people and understanding how to work with these subject matter experts within the scope of what we're trying to do. Where it was our collective project, so ours and LSI, primarily LSI's, but we're helping navigate that, but understanding what the overall objective was and being able to filter what these subject matter experts were saying about what's possible versus not possible and deciding what to listen to or not listen to. And we think that we found a solution that is pretty workable with the LLC structure that we're navigating towards. We think that this project is going to be a truly meaningful project for not just the city, but the state, but also the immigrant farmers coming in, and it's going to make it a lot more attractive for immigrant farmers to come to this state. At this point, we will take some questions.
Hey, Cuckoo. This is Zach here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So I just want to mention, yeah, the project was a lot. So I kind of wondered why some of these things just never happened before. But as we dove into it, and as you guys helped us navigate this, I think we came up with a lot of barriers that we didn't realize existed, especially to land ownership. And you know, I really appreciate you guys' work in that, because what we're trying to do is not really been done before, and like you said, it requires a creative approach. You know, and I think trying to get more equity in, basically we're trying to overcome barriers of, you know, the market and existing land ownership throughout the entire state. and the rules that are put in place are not favorable to anybody who is low resource, you know, and laws are put in place to prevent people who don't own land already from owning land. So I want to throw that out there, that the complexity of this and the barriers that we're up against were really, I didn't realize how big they were. And so I think even identifying a way that farmers can come together to buy land legally has been, you know, I think we kind of went into it thinking we might get farther down the road. But I appreciate all your work, like that what we're trying to do ended up being a lot more complex and difficult than what we set out to do originally. I think we all learned a lot through the process. So.
It definitely is, Zach. Your team has been amazing in first having the broad vision, and hopefully we've been able to help with some definition and the steps that need to happen to make it work.
Okay. I see that we got a bunch of questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and start getting some of these going. Paige asks, could you tell us just a little bit more about the surveys, what was indicated from the responses? Definitely one of the larger indications was that the farmers do want continued help from LSI going forward. That was across the board quite evident, and they are interested in working with each other, but not necessarily, they didn't want to, no individual person wanted to jump into that management role. So it's going to be a little bit interesting for them once they do get organized. So there's a lot more I can go in there, but that would probably take about 30 minutes. So those are just the two highlights I'm going to leave you guys with. So
yeah, could I jump in there too?
Absolutely.
Jeff? Okay. So I would want to touch on, you know, what was on them. It kind of surrounded the idea of how would the business be preferred to be owned. And so we had questions that led into that. You know, how does the business want to be governed? Profits and losses, how would you want that distributed? You know, how members join and leave the business to what rights and responsibilities of each member, you know, what would they have with that? How do farmers want this set up? You know, we had a bunch of different open-ended questions on there, but hoping to get different answers so we could help mold which, you know, best fits their wants and desires from this. Because ultimately, you know, one of the tougher parts was how can we do this ethically, legally, but then also fit what their wants were in their future to hopefully, you know, impact it for the better. So.
Exactly. So, all right, it looks like next question we have up is from Paul Livko. Do you know what the demand is for this, to be the farmers for the solution? How large an opportunity is there? Currently, LSI has a very long waiting list for their global greens, just getting people into their individual farms. And there is a waiting list going out to the larger incubator farm. So there is a pretty decent demand. And I think if a pipeline is established to get people from the incubator farm out to their own farm, it wouldn't stop. So this would potentially be something that would be going forward and maybe needing to procure more land in the future. So definitely, I think there is a demand for it within the immigrant community that LSI serves. Next question from Belma. Are there any organizations that can provide legal support for free advice? Yes. The two that we found right off the bat was the Drake Law Center as well as the ISU Center for Ag Law and Taxation. So those were free resources that we found. We have a very low overhead for this, so we wanted to make sure that we, if at all possible, found the best resources we could. So those were the resources we found. Is there any other questions or anything else anyone from my group would want to say?
Cuckoo, this is Nick from LSI. What did you say was the name of the model? The condo, was it condo plus something?
Condo op.
Condo op. Gotcha.
Yeah, condo co-op just mashed up together.
Great. Well, I want to reiterate kind of what Zach shared as well. I know I got to be with you kind of on the front end, but really appreciate this group diving into a very large project, and yeah, I just want you to know how grateful we are for the work this group did to kind of understand like all the components that are going on here and really help us identify some great next steps. So thank you for doing that.
Having been involved with this group a little more than the others, I think of it as building a house on a water table. You have no idea when you're starting to build that you're going to run into some potential very big issues to get over before you can start a build. So I think from what I've seen, it's that perspective in that you may feel that it took a while to start making some progress, but the fact that you were able to identify so many things that you aren't able to do is part of the significant outcome, in that at least you know that those things are not options. Any other questions for this group? All right, good job, group 2 with LSI, and really appreciate your perspective and all your work. And we'll go ahead and get started. It's just really been amazing, the outlines that you've all given this afternoon. And next we have some information around what the Eat Greater Des Moines project put together. And I know that everyone's going to find it really interesting. And to start it off, we have Andy Hahn. Andy, I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Sounds great. Thank you, Anne. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for our third and final presentation. Today, we'll be presenting our work with our nonprofit partner, Eat Greater Des Moines. And let's get started. First on background and project description. So I would like to start off with some 5 quick facts about hunger in Iowa. First, 1 in 10 Iowans, our very neighbors, are struggling with hunger each day. By struggling with hunger, I defined it as they receive SNAP benefits. And 100,000 children, Iowan children, are struggling with hunger. That comes out to be 1 in 7 children here in Iowa, which is about 14%. And the main takeaway from this slide should be that the average SNAP benefit per person per meal is $1.22, but the average cost of a meal is $2.79. So SNAP benefits are simply not enough to have a sustainable meal each time. And this was before the pandemic. So we all know that the pandemic has completely ruptured the way we live. So issues like this pave the way for community fridges. Now, community fridges are a community resource where people can come and go to grab food from a fridge or drop off food that they would like to donate, both in a fridge or at a pantry. And community fridges have seen a rise in the pandemic because, 1, there's low risk of virus transmission because there's no face-to-face interaction, you just come and go. Second, it is quite accessible. You might have seen on the news long lines of food, long lines of car at food pantry waiting, but sometimes those food pantry only allow people in cars to receive food. So if you don't have a car, you're out of luck. But community fridges are more accessible because if you're walking, if you have a bike, you're welcome. And most importantly, it is anonymous. There's no signups, there's no documentation, there's no need to prove anything. You can just come and go, be on your way. And one piece of stats is that fridge.org, which is a national database of community fridges, they had 12 fridges in March of 2020, but right now they have over 165 fridges across 28 states, which gives you an idea of the immense growth that we have seen in our nation. There are 3 fridges here in Des Moines: Sweet Tooth Community Fridge, Northside Community Fridge, and our First in Iowa partnered up with Jung's Oriental Food Store to create a community fridge, all launched in the past 6 months. Throughout our project, we work closely with 2 community partners. One is Eat Greater Des Moines. They are a Iowa-based nonprofit fighting food insecurity, fighting hunger, and uniting communities through food and building communities. Second partner is Sweet Tooth Farm. They are an urban garden here in the heart of Des Moines, and they provide fresh produce to our neighbors and actually have make an appearance at the Heart of Des Moines Farmers Market on 6th and 4th Avenue on Saturdays from 2 to 4 p.m. So they sell fresh produce there. Quick plug. All right. In December of 2020, Eat Great Des Moines partnered with Sweet Tooth Farm to launch Sweet Tooth Community Fridge, a first of its kind here in Des Moines. And since they launched, it has been wildly successful. Eat Great Des Moines provided a fridge to Sweet Tooth Farm, and the fridge is emptied in stock on a daily basis, which gives you an idea of the impact it's already making in our community. Where we come in is that 3 months ago, we started this journey. 8 of us from 3 companies partnered up with Eat Great Des Moines to provide 3 things. One is a toolkit, a handbook on how to start a community fridge here in Des Moines. Second, screening tools for new locations and partners so that if you're interested in starting a community fridge, there's a kind of rubric that we use to evaluate potential partners. Second, a prototype for a fridge activity analyzer, aka the Fridgelizer, so that we can monitor how a fridge is doing and track a metric that we can use to make data-driven decisions. So these are the 8 of us from 3 companies. Andy, Tim, Gina, Cody, Lexi, Chelsea, Alyssa, and Robin. Mighty team, and I'm so excited to present all the hard work that we all put into this project. So like any good research project, it started with information gathering. So we had an all-group meeting to discuss our goals. We also met with Aubrey Alvarez, ED at Eat Great Des Moines, to learn about her goals and what they do as an organization. And we also met with Monica Osharsky, the owner and operator at Sweet Tooth Farm, so that we can learn more about how the fridge works and learn some best practices, get some resources, and go from there. Eventually, we made our way to the Sweet Tooth Community Fridge as a field work. So on our way there, we stopped by Aldi's, grabbed some food to donate, and we went to the fridge. And it was a bit cold, but all in good fun. We got to see the fridge exterior, the fridge itself, and the pantry. And this is a great opportunity for all of us to interact with an actual community fridge and see what works really well, what could be improved, and interacting in a way that's meaningful. A lot of photos, we're organizing, we're donating, taking good photos and everything. All right. And then we would go on to do this multiple times, make more trips, continue meeting with our stakeholders, and providing regular updates to all of our stakeholders as well. All right. Right now, I'd like to hand it off to Gina and Tim to talk about their toolkit.
Thanks, Andy. So as we've said, one of our deliverables was to create this toolkit or a guide for how to start a community fridge in the Des Moines area. So the thought process behind this was, this is kind of our corporate white paper, if you will. It's going to go into background information, best practices, insights that we learned about starting a community fridge. This is written for the Des Moines market, but given the scope of our project. But if you were someone from a different city, different state, and you stumbled across this document, it would still contain a lot of relevant information. But that's just one thing to keep in mind, is we did use Sweet Tooth Farm as our example. So if you were to stumble across this, keep in mind it's for this market specifically, but you'd still learn a lot. Actually, can you go back real quick? And so this is it's a starter kit for prospective partners, or if you are potentially interested in becoming a new community fridge organizer. And we just think that if you are someone or an organization that's interested in getting involved in this space, this is probably the best place that you can start, at least with what we're doing here. So there's essentially in this document, there's essentially 3 broad subjects that we're going to cover. So I'll cover this one here. Gina's going to take over for the next couple. So this section is about just background of community fridges. Some of this information Andy already covered in his presentation. We just go into a little bit more depth and just in more of a write-up form. So what is a community fridge? What are some advantages of community fridges, maybe as opposed to a traditional food bank, especially in the pandemic era? We go into typical responsibilities of a community fridge organizer. Obviously, that's going to vary case by case a little bit, but we think there's a lot of common themes there. And then finally, the last portion is additional challenges. more specifically zoning law, which is a complex issue. Seems like with kind of a general theme with some of these projects is some of the legal aspects are a little bit more challenging. We determined that providing specific legal advice did not fall within the scope of our deliverable. So this section pretty much just calls it out as a potential issue. Like, hey, if you're interested in getting involved in this, this is going to be a hurdle that you have to go over. But again, we're not providing specific legal advice on this matter. So with that being said, I'll pass it over to Gina. She'll take you through the rest of the document.
Thank you. So the next portion of our toolkit revolves around the insights that we gathered from local research and fieldwork. So like Andy mentioned, we interviewed Monica, who is the owner of the community fridge at Sweet Tooth Farm. And we really wanted to gain some insights on what works well with the existing community fridge and what may be some hardships that it faces. And the goal was to document these insights into this toolkit and use them as helpful tips when someone is interested in starting and maintaining a community fridge. So in this portion of the toolkit, we talk about selecting the right location for a new fridge, and important aspects of making it accessible for everyone. So that might be being able to park and drop off donations or pick items up if they choose to drive to it. We also include how to actually set up the fridge and build a structure around it to weatherproof it. And we include materials, a big materials list for everything that someone would need to set up and build the structure, as well as the dimensions of things. So this could be easily replicated in other fridge situations. There are also helpful tips about community ownership of the fridge, as well as fridge capacity and food safety. And some of those things could be like donators labeling each item with an ingredients list and a date to ensure that when volunteers are going to clean out the fridge, they know whether they need to throw out old food or not. There are also suggestions for how volunteers should regularly clean and organize the fridge, as well as the general time commitment involved for the fridge owner to ensure that the responsibilities are clearly outlined. Because at the end of the day, there is a fridge owner, but the community itself is also responsible for donations and cleaning and organizing the fridge. And lastly, we wanted to include the marketing or social media aspect of what we learned from the Sweet Tooth Farm Community Fridge. And that means creating and managing a Facebook and Instagram page so that the owner could interact with the community and volunteers and post general updates about the fridge. Then the last part of this toolkit consists of a checklist that someone can print off and use when starting the new community fridge so they aren't forgetting any steps in the process. And it's really taking the toolkit as a whole and turning it from about 25 pages of helpful information and insights down into just a one-page checklist, very high level, that is very consumable. And that can be very helpful when thinking about all the different elements that goes into a community fridge.
All right, thank you to Gina and Tim for presenting. I'd like to hand it off to Chelsea, who will start off with our screening tools.
Thanks, Andy. So yes, our second deliverable was to create 2 rubrics for Eat Greater Des Moines, specifically to help them find new locations for fridges, as well as new partners for people who would run the fridge and people who would be delivering food to the fridge. So we wanted it to be quick, 2 very distinct rubrics, evaluating, like we said, the location and the partners. We wanted it to be reliable, a handy tool that Aubrey or anyone at Eat Greater Des Moines can quickly use and evaluate new locations and partners. It's not to eliminate a location per se or a partner, but it's just to give them a good indication of where that's at. We grade them A, B through C. So if a lot of location or if a location and partners are getting a lot of A's, they can easily kind of be given the green light to go ahead and get a fridge. Whereas Eat Greater Des Moines can work with some of the locations or partners that are getting C's and some B's. We wanted it to be clear and sensible, defined criteria. One can make evaluations with confidence with those letter grades. I'll hand it over to Lexi to talk about our location rubric.
Right. So as Chelsea said, we made two rubrics, one being the partners and then this one being the location screening tool. So Chelsea and I came up with 3 criteria to kind of narrow down the requirements for picking out a new location for a community fridge. So those 3 are accessibility, privacy, and community need. Accessibility being, is it easily accessible from all people in the community? Is there places to park? Is there places to easily walk to, ride your bike, etc.? And then privacy, as Andy mentioned, how important anonymity is to community fridges. We want to make sure that there is no direct data tracking in terms of who exactly is coming to the fridge and what exactly are they taking. It's more so just seeing a number of how many people are coming. And then community need, we want to make sure that the community that the fridge is a part of is going to be used and needed by the members in that community. Next, Alyssa and Robin will discuss the partner and donor screening tool.
Thank you, Lexi. So what you're seeing here is a snapshot of our partner and donor screening tool. And just like Chelsea and Lexi's screening tool, we established a few criteria. And like what Chelsea said earlier, it's not meant to disqualify anyone, but merely as a starting point of, if you want to be a partner or owner of a fridge, these are some of the things that you'll want to consider. So the first one being fridge visits. Ideally, we would want a partner to be able to visit the fridge regularly if possible, just so that they can see if something is going wrong, even if it's not every single day, but at least some ability to do that regularly would be ideal. Next, we have resources. We want to consider 4 different aspects under here. First of all, does the organization have volunteer support? Ideally, they would have a small group of people who can work together to support the fridge. And then second, do they already have a source of food donations? So if they already partner with someone, then we don't need to go to the effort of trying to find a donor in that case, for example. And then the next consideration is whether or not they have the ability to take monetary donations, and then what they can do with that. And then finally, under resources, do they have enough financial backing to be able to support this fridge? And then the very last criteria that we want to consider is the communication and promotion aspect, whether it be social media or a website. We think that it's important for them to have a way to communicate information about the fridge, and if possible, have it be a 2-way communication where people can contact them and then they can contact the community back and respond to those questions.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, I think Robin had.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
That's okay. So we kind of, as Alyssa and I were working through what would be considered, like a partner, we kind of decided and realized that there's almost 2 pieces to it. Well, someone who's the partner, kind of the fridge owner, and those are the questions that Alyssa has gone through. And the other piece of it was more of the donations. So some of the criteria that we wanted to, again, not to eliminate anybody or disqualify anybody, but just so they have an understanding of how frequently donations may be coming in, what types of food may be coming in, what different varieties can they expect? Is it fresh fruit? Is it, pastries, breads, milk, eggs, those types of things, just to get a better understanding of what they can expect from that particular donor. And then another benefit of a donor would be that they could deliver their own food that they're donating. Eat Greater Des Moines is able to help with that and help facilitate some of the delivery, but it is usually ideal for the donor themselves to be able to deliver the food to the fridge itself.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Next, I would like to hand it over to Cody, who will talk about the Frigilizer.
So community fridges in Des Moines have a chicken and the egg problem, where to get corporate and governmental support, we have to show that people are using the community fridges, that there's a need for community fridges. So we need to legitimize community fridges in Des Moines. The problem with that is where a typical food pantry, you can log who's using it and like when. But for this, we need it to be completely anonymous, because kind of the point of community fridges is that you don't have like an entity, anyone can come up to it and use it whenever they want. So how do you track usage statistics anonymously when you can't use a camera or any logging like that? So what we came up with is essentially a Raspberry Pi with a light sensor and a temperature and humidity sensor. A Raspberry Pi is basically a very tiny computer. It's roughly about $10, maybe like 2 inches long. Very, very, very small, that has like Wi-Fi capabilities. And then we connected a light sensor and a temperature sensor to that. Temperature and humidity sensor, obviously it's a fridge, so we have to be able to track, if it's too hot or too cold. And then the light sensor is actually how we track usage. So when a fridge is closed, the light is off, and when the fridge is open, the light comes on. So you could essentially say that when someone opens the refrigerator, the light is on, and since the light is on, someone must be using the refrigerator. So that's essentially a system that we came up with for how we track that. Then there's also some power monitoring built into it. So if the fridge shuts off, we obviously want to know that so we can go out and fix it. And that's done via the fridge and the sensor is hooked up to the same power supply. So if the fridge is shut off or the sensor shut off, then they both have to be shut off at the same time. So we essentially have a keep alive signal set up in it. So if the fridge is supposed to send out temperature data every 5 minutes and it's been 10 minutes and it hasn't sent anything, then the fridge must be off. And then we can do some alerting based on that. And then we did make pretty comprehensive documentation on how to build one of these. We made everything open source. It's available on GitHub, all the code and all the documentation. And we're actually going to be presenting that to Aubrey next week. And we're going to try and have her build one of these fridges from start to finish to kind of prove out that the documentation is production ready. So we bought an extra set of essentially supplies to make the new fridge, and we're going to hopefully build another one. And I think she might want to connect it to the a new community fridge that opened up in Des Moines. So we're excited for that. So the fridge analyzer dashboard, we used a tool called Initial State, which is essentially a Internet of Things streaming service and data visualizer to make these dashboards. And so these dashboards are available online. They update real time, 24/7. They're drag and drop, so you can customize these like at will very easily. You can add kind of anything you want, anything you can think of, you can put in here. You can also add like some code in the background, like if you know how to write the code for it. Otherwise, it's like very easy. It's simple as using essentially like Microsoft Word to just drag and drop things. And then built into Initial State is email and text alerting. So there's some like potential scenarios where you might want to send an alert. As you can see in the photo, the fridge is at 38.5 degrees Fahrenheit. For example, if the fridge drops to, or like fridge, it's like hits like 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 degrees Fahrenheit, you don't want that. It can send you an email or a text or both to wherever you want, where the fridge loses power or a specific sensor loses power. So there's a temperature and a light sensor. If either of those lose power, it will also alert you to that. And then as part of that dashboard, we have the visitor thing on the bottom, so you can track like how many visitors show up and like when. And then on the very bottom there with the little gauge where it says, is the fridge open? That actually updates in real time. So if someone opened the fridge, you would see the gauge like go all the way to the right. And then when they close it, it'd go all the way to the left. And like it's pretty fast. It's literally real time. So it's maybe like half-second delay. So you could watch it if you so chose and see who's opening the fridge and when. Yeah, okay. So the value of this is really in analyzing some data so that Aubrey can take that to corporate sponsors or the local government and kind of petition them to maybe legitimize this a bit more and maybe loosen up some of the legal constraints they have. So we can get like what time is the fridge the most busy from this just by grouping some data. What day is it the most busy? How many times is the fridge open per day, and also per week, per month? We can organize that in any way. What holidays is it used the most on, or building up to a holiday? A natural disaster, is it used more after there's a flood or a tornado? When everyone was panic buying everything at the start of COVID, remember there was no groceries in the store, what does that do to the usage of the fridge? Does it go up or down? And then also, is the fridge turned on? How long is the fridge open for? Are people spending a minute looking at the fridge, 10 seconds? So having all these metrics really helps get data so that we can make decisions and get more sponsorships, essentially.
Thank you very much, Cody. So all of our artifacts, the handbook, two screening tools, and the device will be transferred over to eCareer Des Moines next week. Our engagement is over, but we feel pretty great about the tools that we have created and feel like eCareer Des Moines can provide that guiding leadership and support to people interested in starting their own community fridge right here in the metro. So where we go from here, as an echo to the earlier slide, hunger is here in Iowa. It was an issue before the pandemic. It was an issue during the pandemic, and it will be an issue going forward. And community fridges can help by providing safe, quick, and anonymous service to patrons. And for a community fridge to work, it needs a network of volunteers and donations. And there are challenges such as the zoning laws, but we believe that the future of community fridges here in Des Moines is bright and that it will be successful. We would like to thank the Greater Des Moines Partnership, eCareer Des Moines, Sweet Tooth Farm, our employers and family and friends for helping us along this journey. We greatly appreciate everything they have done for us. And we'll now take questions. Thank you. All right, let's take a look at the chat. First question, is there a criteria check for quality of food being donated to the fridge? Are partners responsible for any type of quality checks? Gina, Tim, would you like to take that one?
Sure, great question. There is criteria for what is being donated. So it cannot be any partially eaten food. And also when people donate it, there is, at least at the Sweet Tooth Farm fridge, there is a requirement to have your name on it if you are donating food, and also the date at which you are donating the food and the ingredients list. So if anyone has any allergens, they can check and see if they are able to eat that food or not. And then there are also regular volunteers that come and sort through the fridge to see if any items have been expired or there are any items that got put in there that happened to be already opened or something like that. So those volunteers come on a regular basis and just check the fridge to make sure people are adhering to those rules.
Awesome, thank you. The question here, is there a regular inventory taken of what is in the fridge by donors, hosts, etc.? There isn't a spreadsheet, but for example, Sweet Tooth Community Fridge, they have a very active Facebook page where people post, hey, everyone, the fridge is completely stocked. Take a look at a photo of it. Or people might say, hey, everyone, the fridge is running low. We have plenty of bread, but not much milk and eggs. So there is like an informal, more qualitative follow-up. Next, let's see. Can homemade items be contributed? Yes, they can. In fact, a lot of baked goods are donated as long as, again, with the ingredients list, sort of like any allergies and like a date of when it was made. And those are absolutely welcome.
Hey, Andy, I think we might have skipped over Paige's question. She was asking how much the Frigilizer costs, both the physical monitoring system and the app.
Great question. Cody, can you take that one?
So the Frigilizer, as I built it, is roughly $40, I think, to make. It's $5 for each sensor, and then $10 for the Raspberry Pi, so that's $20, and then whatever kind of container you want to put it in. So, you know, it's like plus or minus depending on like the type of container, but like the actual technology, the hard part that can't change is $20. And then, you know, if you want like longer wires, that might change the price. If you have to like run 10 feet of cable versus 1 feet of cable, you know, it might be like 50 cents per 1 foot of cable. So it's under $50, kind of any way you put it. And then for the actual app, it is $10 a month. And you get like full support with that. You get like 24/7 support, data retention forever. You won't lose any data, the daily backups, infinite amount of storage, infinite amount of streaming. So yeah, $10 a month to run it.
Cody, there's one more for you. Does it track and send alerts if the fridge is open for a long time?
So technically, it would, based on if the fridge is open for a long time, the temperature would obviously go up very high. Like even if you open the fridge for like 5 seconds, the temperature in the fridge would go up probably 10 degrees if it was the summer, just because of how the laws of thermodynamics work and heat moving to lower pressure areas. So if the fridge was open for 5 minutes, you would get a temperature alert because the temperature changes near instantaneous, which would then alert you. But in terms of like the fridge has been open 10 minutes, send alert, it doesn't do that. We can rely on the temperature sensor for that.
All right. And Tyler asks, how will people learn about the community fridge? Those who do not have access to the internet, Facebook. Good question. So we spoke with Monica about this, and apparently word of mouth, it's still very much a thing. One anecdote she shared is that there are people from Marshalltown, I believe, driving up here to get food. So I think word is spreading. And in fact, Monica of Sweet Tooth Community Farm doesn't really like promotion because sometimes there are days where there's not enough food to keep up with the demand. Let's see. All right, one last one before we close out. Brandon asked, this may fall under the category of zoning laws and may be out of the scope of the project, but were there any additional considerations taken after Des Moines notified the North Des Moines Community Fridge that it was violating city code in April? That was brought up to our attention, and we included the aspect that in the handbook, that zoning laws will be a challenge that you have to address. And I understand that ICRA Des Moines and are working with our community partners so that they can address it and come up with a compromise that could accommodate everyone as much as possible. Sweet. Any other questions before we hand it back to Anne? All right. Thank you all for staying till the end. I'd like to pass it back to Anne.
All right. Another thumbs up on the third project. Just amazing work that you've all done. Who would have thought of putting together a little piece of technology that's relatively inexpensive to help monitor safety with food in the community? That's awesome. I have some closing comments, but before I do that, I know Marvin wanted to add some words for everyone. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Marvin, for a couple minutes.
All right. Well, thank you, Ann. First of all, I just want to say thank you to all the organizations that allowed our fellows to come in alongside them and participate and be able to develop such great outcomes, and projects provided from CIS to LSI and E-Greater Des Moines. And then I just like to, first of all, congratulate the fellows. The innovation and the ideas that you all and the time you put into these projects, it really was reflected today in your presentation. So great job to all of you on this work. As Cody, as you're seeing, some of you have some ideas that if you're thinking of entrepreneurship and going down other roads, that you have opportunities in some of these different presentations that you all provided today. So I'm really excited just to see all the great things that came from these presentations and about the future of what our workforce looks like in the greater Des Moines region. If you all have this innovation by just taking the time to volunteer for a project, I'm excited to see all the great things to come as you have more time to dedicate and put into the work you do every day and future volunteer opportunities. So again, thank you all for the fellows, the organizations that participated, and we look forward to just all the great things to come from all of you in the future. So thank you. And
thank you, Marvin. You took the words out of my mouth in terms of the organizations that have helped with this project as well, and really working so closely with the fellows. That's such an important piece, is that it be a collaborative effort. And it's such an important discovery when you realize how it's kind of the many hands make light work philosophy, that one person might not be able to make a lot of progress, but many are able to get there faster than you would alone. So really amazing contributions that you're giving, not only for our community, but for other communities as well. Next steps, you will be presenting to your organizations. I know that you have those planned here in the next week or so. If it is possible to send your outlines, go ahead and do that yet tonight. Otherwise, I'll send that with the next communication to the managers. I know they're going to want to see your overall recommendation. And I will also be sending tomorrow a feedback sheet for all of you to give some perspective around the project and what you've learned and the importance of some of the programs that you've gone through and how that has fit into your work. And I will also be sending out to the community organizations a survey asking them some questions around their perspective in the work that they did with the Des Moines Fellows and the program. So that will come tomorrow, and your feedback is important in continuing to know how we can make this better with capstone projects in the future. You definitely had very challenging projects, so please pat yourselves on the back because they were all very, very well done.